Hello, everybody, and happy Thanksgiving Eve. We got a smaller crew here today, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to do some good discussions. We're doing Modern Management Essential Foundations Unit 3 meetup. I actually had to double check because I can't believe how fast this cohort has gone by. I'm like, there's no way that we are 6 weeks through this cohort, but we are, which is crazy. So this week's material, we're going to go over a couple of themes. I'm going to pass the mic over to Alex and Sam about the programming assignment. So I hope you all enjoy, taking some standardized gym programming and modifying or scaling it down to Doris or Anna. And we can have a discussion about how easy or hard that assignment was. It's purposefully kind of vague. So you all can kind of take your creativity and go with that as long as we have justification. And then we can talk about your falls prevention pitches. I've been really geeking out about falls prevention lately because I think it's something that is such a huge issue in North America and let's face all over the world. But something that despite the ample amounts of money that has been thrown at this problem, we aren't really making any notches to improve it. So really interesting. I would love to hear your all's thoughts on week 6. But first, we have a couple of questions in the doc, but did anybody have any questions that they wanted to go over about the programming assignment before I hand it over to Alex and Sam? What did you all think of it? Did you find it easy, hard, fun, challenging? I'd love to know what your thoughts are. This isn't something we traditionally do sometimes in PT/OT practice.
I liked it. You mean the exercise program?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you find it easy?
I just think it's so essential in what we do that I always think it's fun. So I went into PT school. I grew up dancing, and I love just the conservative approach to, medical management. And I think, using exercises creatively is the foundation of what we do. Well, there are the manual techniques and things like that, but when it comes down to it, being really creative also in your manual skills, not all manual approaches should be taken exactly the same way either. So yeah. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I love that. I'm right now trying to submit a systematic review that's on the use of resistance training for mobility disability and its impact on function. And I put it into a geriatric medical journal and they told me that it wasn't medical. Exercise wasn't medical and it should go into a physical activity journal. And I was like, this essentially tells us what's wrong with our medical system right now. I was ranting about this. I was like, there is no way that physical activity and optimizing physical function is not a medical priority in older adults. Whatever, it's going to be rerouted to a different journal, but it's crazy. Okay.
I do think that as far as finding, and Park mentioned the 1 rep max, I still don't know if figuring out the 1 rep max is something that would, I don't know. I just don't see that fitting into my practice and how it would be super beneficial or not.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is a very good question. So one, if we do not have a baseline for what a person's strength levels are, how do we know if we're underdosing or not? How can we figure out if we're underdosing if we don't have a baseline? I can open that up to the group. So you're choosing 5 pounds for a sit to stand and you have no idea what their 1 rep max is. Are you underdosing or not?
Well, if you go to fatigue, if you for each set you go to fatigue, then I don't think
volitional fatigue. How would you describe fatigue?
Whenever they say I can't do anymore. And I know you said that does vary one day to another.
Yeah, it can. But then, so say they did 8, would you consider that an 8 rep max?
I don't know. I think I just say that's their fatigue level, and then the next set they can do 5 or.
Yeah. So then that's a good point. So if you got 8 the first set, And then the next set they can do 5, then you did find a true 8 rep max, because a rep max isn't repeatable. So if people say, oh, I did a 5 rep max, 3 sets of 5, you did not do a 5 rep max, because you wouldn't be able to do a 5 rep again. Then you put that into a max calculator and you get an estimated 1 rep max from that. So most of the times we're not going to use a 1 rep max. We're going to use a 5 to 8 rep max, doing exactly what you said. And then we're going to put that into you can either use a 1 rep max table, you could grab the app, or you can search 1 rep max estimator. And then what you're doing already, going to volitional failure, is a great way of finding a submax. And now you do have a quantifiable baseline that you can use. So you're already doing it. You just can take the estimated 1 rep max to get a baseline level of strength. So I would say most of the time, I have had certain situations where I'm trying to prove to a client that they're stronger than they think, where I'll get them to do a 1 rep max just to see what that weight feels like. Or if they have to do something that's currently above their capability. For example, my older adult men who work on a farm and they're having trouble with certain things, like I'm going to have to push them to that 1 rep max if they're needing to, do something around the farm that requires a certain amount of weight. But a lot of the times, exactly what Dustin said, you're doing an AMRAP set until they tell you that they can't. They're starting to show signs that their form is breaking down to exceeding that kind of optimal zone that you feel comfy with, or they tell you they can't do anymore. And if they repeat, you try to get them to repeat it again, and their rep range goes down, then you know that you got a true 8 rep max for that day. So you can get an estimated 1 rep max from that, and then you can use that to set the tone or get an idea of what they might be able to be capable of in a 5, 6, 8, or 10 rep range.
And that brings up a good discussion, because I think that is a common sentiment of a lot of folks that we work with, in terms of getting this number and calculating, especially when you're working with folks that are going to be relatively weak in particular movements, to where their estimated 1 rep max is going to be relatively low. And if you're not carrying around all these tiny increments of weights and whatnot, or if you're in something like a home setting, it can be, somewhat meticulous. But with those AMRAP sets, especially the example that Christina gave, let's say they can only do 8 reps. That's a pretty solid dosage right there. That's relatively hard for a lot of folks. But if they're pushing that 15, 20, 25 rep range, which a lot of people may not know until they actually test it. So if you are going to fatigue and they are staying in some of those lower rep ranges, like you're in a pretty good spot. But I think a lot of folks would be shocked if they currently had their patients do an AMRAP set. The vast majority would likely be able to bust out 20 some reps easy. And that is under dosage to the core right there. So the AMRAP sets can be helpful. And even if you're not calculating out, if you're in that range, those lower numbers, like you're in a pretty good spot. Obviously we want to dial it in for sure, but that ain't a bad place to start for a lot of clinicians.
Week to week, it can change so much that AMRAP really makes a big difference, because like I had someone doing like overhead press, single arm double up presses for shoulder pain. And I was like, okay, on this last one, do as many as you can. Because the week before he wasn't doing very many. He was having trouble having pain with it. I said, do as many as you can. And he busted out 20, 25. And I was like, what number are you on? I was like, and then he told me, I said, stop. We don't need to do this anymore. We're going to load you up.
Yeah.
So it saves your time and theirs. Like, instead of having them do 20, 30 reps of something, have them do a weight that's more meaningful. And it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
I think the perfect example of underdosage in HEP is when you do 3 sets of 10 or something, and then they're like, well, I just did 30 reps because I thought it was boring to wait in between. I was like, solid. We're not going to have you do those exercises.
Yeah, there's your sign.
I'm just going through the comments here.
Park asked a good question about finding examples of things they can lift at home to hit the percentage 1RM goal without them having access to barbell and heavy dumbbells.
Yeah.
Alex could speak to that really well.
Yeah. So Park, like, I don't know if you can carry equipment or if you are not able to, because I know some home health clinicians like can't bring things into the house. I get super far with an 18-pound kettlebell. And if somebody can do like really great two-handed, on the kettlebell deadlifts, I then will just switch it to like one hand on the kettlebell as a way to change up like the deadlift. It makes it a lot more functional just because we lift things with one arm, like very typically, like grocery bags or something like that. So I'll change up the loading strategy. Or in the house, there's like a lot of options. Like a water bottle weighs about a pound. A gallon of milk weighs about 8 pounds. Yeah, about 9 kilos, I guess, would be 18.
8.5.
Yeah, like a little less.
8.5.
Yeah, I'm in outpatient, so I'm talking about like when I send them home to do things on their own.
Well, okay, first always have them scour like a dollar store or Five Below. If you have them, I don't know where you are, sorry. But like some of the dollar stores or like Family Dollar, those places have cheap dumbbells. And Craigslist, because people wanted to do exercise during the pandemic and then didn't. But a water bottle weighs a pound. And then commonly, like if people don't have access to like funds, like I'll just tell them to grab like a liter or like a gallon of water at the store. It's 8 pounds.
Yeah, that's my usual go-to.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then I'll just tell them like keep it and fill it with heavier stuff. And then if they want to bring it in, we can weigh it for them. Or like
I had a
weigh it on their
patient-
scale so they can see how much it is.
I had a patient that wanted to continue doing the same level of deadlifts and be able to progress it at home once she was discharged. And she came in and told me she was using like a stock pot or a big stew pot and then putting stuff in it because it had the handles on both sides so she could get a similar like grip on things. So she was using that. I've told people to just load up like a backpack. You can put books and stuff in it and just put it on a scale. So there's several things you can use in your house to make some weight happen.
Fill up a backpack.
Fill up a
Yeah, and-
reusable grocery bag.
Yeah.
That's one of my go-tos too.
I don't know.
Just like fill it up.
I maxed one of those out and almost
Oh, really?
wrecked someone's foot. So maybe test it on yourself first. That was not good. But it was like a
Double
Kroger
up.
bag. It wasn't like a Whole Food, like the Whole Foods bags. Like those are primo. It was like a Kroger. Those things are cheap. But I think Park too. Like you can combine, if they do have implements, you can combine like lighter weights. Like let's say if you have a lighter kettlebell or dumbbell, maybe you could use put a layer of TheraBand on top of that resistance. Like this can be done definitely with like rows and deadlifts and squats, things of that nature, that you can add a little bit of resistance with the TheraBand when it's wrapped around that implement. And I think in those instances where you're just maxed out, let's say they don't have any relatively high intensity weights or heavy weights for them, that you can always leverage volume as well. Ideally, we're having them lift relatively heavy things, but if that's not easily accessible, then just bumping up their volume and reps and going to fatigue is definitely better than nothing if they only have lightweight, which a lot of like home clinicians will do if they are struggling to find some things at home. And sometimes too, well, not so much an outpatient, but in the home, to get in the position or to move that heavy weight to do some of those movements can be somewhat dicey for individuals. So in that moment, then it may be, okay, maybe you do this lighter one because it's probably gonna be a little safer, maybe from the balance standpoint, do more reps to fatigue or whatever it may be. So you can manipulate some of those other variables if you're not able to bump up the weight. What was that? Instagram. Oh yeah.
That's
check
your
out that
low
Instagram
equipment.
post.
Alex, did you want to take it away and get to some themes from the homework?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna have Sam start it off for us.
Oh, excellent. Sorry.
Guys. Let's see. So mostly I just wanted to talk about, there are a few things that were happening commonly. So I wanted to see if anyone had any input on maybe why they changed that in their program. So I saw several move away from clock yourself. So I was just wondering if anyone had any input on that, and then I'll pull up a couple that to talk about.
What is clock yourself?
So great question. Clock Yourself is a super awesome app. And Christina and Dustin can probably tell you, I know that they know who started it. It was someone in Australia, I believe. But it's an app and it goes to a metronome or it has a steady beat. So you can set how many steps per minute it goes all the way down, like below 40 up to I think 150 or more or 120. And you can do a cognitive load with it. So it will go through a clock and you can do it with upper extremity or lower extremity, but it just creates a very dynamic way to work some balance as well as cognition and dual task. And you can make it harder or easier, speed it up, slow it down. But it's like telling them commands to do within the app. I use it quite a bit with a lot of different diagnoses. And it's just, they end up having fun. At first they're like, what are you making me do? And then you start speeding it up or doing it with them and you end up having a good time. Like it's a great way to make PT a little bit more fun for them, while also getting some good dynamic work going. It's sometimes free, sometimes it's $1.99, like it varies, but it's definitely worth the $2 to $4 that you pay for it.
Yeah, it's solid. Super helpful. Alex has a bunch of really good videos too of different applications and all kinds of different patients.
Yes.
Where she'll have people that are mainly in a wheelchair. And that's the beautiful thing about this app is you can scale it to those types of individuals, but then also all the way up to professional Aussie rules football teams. Like you got such a wide array of humans using this app, all getting the same benefit, which is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. This is not a professional endorsement of this app. We have to say that because I think that's illegal for us to be in continuing education saying you need to download this app. We have no connection. We don't get anything from Meg or Clock Yourself. We just use it a ton and it's been pretty helpful.
Hey, Sam, quick question. What were they changing Clock Yourself to?
It varied. I was just pulling up one. I think I can share my screen.
Yeah, you're a co-host, I believe.
Where'd it go? There. Is it sharing?
Just for me, I had, I don't know if I changed it on mine or not, but I have tried to give it to a couple patients and they have flip phones and that doesn't work so well. And I have just some other folks that are in the older ages that downloading apps isn't like their strong suit. So I haven't really given it out necessarily as an exercise yet, just because I need someone that's technologically savvy enough. And I've even had people bring in their phones and it's still a little bit challenging.
Yeah,
So
sometimes
typically
too,
if
like
I'm in the clinic, I just do it on mine. Yeah. I just have it on my phone and I just set it up. Like we have a parallel bar mounted to the wall. So I just actually balance it on the parallel bar so that they have that to grab if they need to. But I of course cue them, hey, try not to hold on if you don't have to. And then they reach to either imaginary clock on the floor or like you can do colors too. So it's like more in quadrants. And I've actually put down each color of TheraBand on the floor, like just in a square around them. And that works out pretty well. Treadmill. I saw treadmill a couple of times on there, or walking. I think treadmill was the most common like switch for it though. And then this is Schuler's progression, and he had sprint and he put it to a 50-pound sled push, which I thought was great because you're still going to get some cardio with that sled push. But I was wanting to ask, I don't know if he's on here, if he would ever have her sprinting or a version of sprinting.
Yeah, I guess that's a good group question if he's not on the call. Like, does the 50-pound sled push preserve the stimulus of this 100-meter sprint?
No takers.
What are we trying to improve? What modality of fitness are we trying to improve with the sprint?
Anaerobic threshold.
Yeah, we're looking anaerobically, right? Power, exactly.
Power.
Yep.
So do we think a 50-pound sled push is going to promote power? Because what's the 50 pounds going to do to that person?
Slow them down.
Absolutely. It's going to slow them down.
It's the power.
So, I mean, maybe it would be a cool stimulus to do the 50-pound sled push and then leave the sled, do another 50-meter like sprint then, just to feel the difference of like the pushing the sled and feeling really slow and then going as fast as they can. Like that might be like interesting to that person. But a lot of the time when we do, like when you modify a gym program or you're modifying programming, we're always trying to keep the intended stimulus if we can. Like that's definitely what I want to do. So if sprinting is maybe not an option, what is another option we can tell Anna to do if sprint isn't the right word, I guess?
I think a lot of people saw sprint and just thought of like how we would go sprint off, but that's not what, like you just sprint to your capacity is what that entails.
I tell people to sprint all the time and then they laugh.
Do your best.
And then they try to do it. And then there's some type of running thing happening or like the fastest walking that they've done in a while, which is power to that person.
Mhm.
Ooh, somebody wrote could perform on a bike. True. If there were balance or mobility limitations or anything like that, totally could sprint on a bike. Or if there's mobility, if there's stability limitations that you're kind of nervous about the person going as fast as possible, give them that assistive device. Like make them hold a walker, four-wheeled walker in their hands or a rollator and just like go for it. And they're going to feel a little bit more stable. And then they're really going to be able to pick up the speed.
Awesome.
Oh yeah. And fast marching too. What a good idea. Sweet.
Quick steps of some sort. And then Stephanie had put a flexibility. She had here on a couple of times different stretching, like a supine hip flexor stretch, holding for 30 seconds. And if anyone wants to answer, my question was going to be, what other type of dynamic stretch could you do instead of a 30-second hold that might be more beneficial for other aspects?
You should go, what's the world's greatest?
There's like, it's like a comp train thing, world's greatest stretch, or is like Marcus Philly does that. I don't know. It's called the world's greatest stretch. There's like, it's like
Sorry if there's yelling behind me at some point because I'm at my family's house. It's like basically a anterior lunge, down, elbow to the ground, and like rotating. So you're getting still a hip flexor stretch with it all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that, and then Tom put half kneeling, and that's kind of what I was thinking, something in line with half kneeling that kind of simulates movements that you need to get on and off the floor while also getting that movement through the hips as well.
Yeah.
That's a bold statement. I've always referred to as the lizard stretch, or heard as
So
as
like
a lizard
so they
stretch.
call it like the Spider-Man lunge sometimes, but then this also has thoracic rotation to like thoracic rotation. So you're opening up towards the anterior leg.
Got it.
I like that. It's like dynamic and
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have the
reversal
dynamic
would be
thing,
more
like you do it, get up, walk 2 steps, do it on the other side.
yeah.
That's cool.
I like overly large steps or walking too for people who
Yeah.
maybe for like a full lunge is like not super possible, but you want a little hip flexor stretch. Just
Mhm.
like biggest possible steps.
Yeah.
would be
Give 'em
cool.
Any sort of hip extension. Yeah, Sam, I'm with you. We were saying the same thing. Any hip extension.
Please.
Like,
I love butt kickers at the counter, like forcing somebody to be like knees almost at like the counter and then doing like a butt kick back. And then they have a lot of feedback at the counter because like their knee keeps going anteriorly. So I like that as an exercise for sure.
And then I was going to use this one as example for under and overdosing. So that's where that 1 rep max calculator really comes in handy. on here. We had a couple of spots that might have been underdosed. I can't remember who she had off the top of my head.
It looks like Anna, maybe.
Yeah, this is Anna. So the deadlifts were maybe a little underdosed. And then down here we had an overdose based on the calculator. And I commented specifically on hers, like what that range would be, because I think she had 30 pounds. Let me see what my comment is. Look at that. So she should be able to do about 10 reps with 14 pounds, and she had it down to 15 or to 5 pounds. Sorry. It was on the sit to stands.
With the 5 pounds, was that 5 pounds for the sit to stand for her?
Yeah.
It's hard to see that font color from on my screen. But yeah, the 5 pounds is a little low given her, what was her run rep max? 15 or something.
Yeah, it was right here. It was these sit to stands, 5 pound set with dumbbells and a 20-inch stool. So she did lower the seat height. So I thought that was good, getting a wider range, but that 5 pounds would still be a little bit low for the desired outcomes that you're trying to get, even with that lower seat. And then she should be able to do about 10 reps with 14 pounds. And that was on, yeah, that was still on that one. So that was the main thing.
So I
It's
guess
just
I guess I was thinking that kind of begs the question of like, I don't think we know exactly what week of programming this would be for Anna, right? Is that safe to assume that, Dustin and Christina, that we're not sure what week this is? So like,
No.
I guess this begs the question of, if this was week 1, could that dosage be appropriate? We can ask the crowd. Like, could a lower than 60% load be appropriate if it was early in the plan of care? And like, what would those reasons be?
Yeah, Chris, that's a great point.
Mm.
Saying if they're fearful of loading.
Definitely promote success. It's Dustin's whole thing of like intentional underdosage that he kind of coined. Like, oh yeah, Lindsay, she could be totally sore. Limiting DOMs because we want patient buy-in and we don't want to scare her away.
Or emergency department
Or
visits.
have her send herself to the emergency department. Cough, cough. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think those are perfect reasons.
Yeah.
And so like, it's hard to know because like, I don't know what week you all assumed this program was for this person too. So we just always, if you know the 1 rep max of that person, you should be trying to shoot for the 60% kind of no matter what. That was also a similar theme that I saw too, Sam, was some underdosage. And I was always I was wondering where that was coming from, and I didn't know if that was maybe an intentional reason or some people maybe just didn't see the 1 rep max calculations listed at the bottom of the cases. All right.
And I think it was on that same program, and I know I already stopped sharing, but the I think it was the dumbbell. It might have been someone else, but had it almost doubled for what her 1 rep max was. So don't want to overdo it either. Like, yeah, you might get a lot of, like, not saying that maybe week 2 she couldn't increase quite a bit, but you don't want to overdo it and get, reduce that buy-in that you gained week 1 by underdosing. Don't go drastically the other direction either, just because you want to load them up. You still got to be aware of who you're with and how they're feeling.
Totally agree.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Which is easier said than done, I feel.
For sure. Especially if you have patients like I work with a very kind of reserved population. I work with at Cherokee Nation. So a lot of times it's hard to draw that information out of people. And the masks haven't helped because, we're trained to read faces and you can't see half their face, and they're very stoic about things a lot of times. So then they come in and they're like, I felt terrible. And this was bothering me while I was in, well, you have to tell me. So I always have to be very diligent about, now you have to tell me if this is a problem, or you have to tell me what your pain level, I have to very emphasize that with several of my patients, just because otherwise they just do it and get it done. And then after the fact, tell me that they were miserable the whole time. I'm like, we can modify these things. You have to tell me. I don't know what you're feeling if you don't let me know. So that's, a key part of that communication piece and building that reliance or alliance with your patients. The other thing I saw a lot of, and Alex, you'll probably hit on this with looking over more of the programs, is switching, like getting rid of snatches altogether, and sprint. Like we already talked about the sprinting, but that was the other two notes that I had was getting rid of snatches altogether. We had one that switched it to a dumbbell curl and then press, and I thought that was a good like modification to start with, and then progress to snatches so that they have the movement to do it, and the ability to, and then just programming it into it.
Yeah, like I thought I saw that a lot too. So snatches were commonly just like they don't have the shoulder range. This is again like an optimal over perfect situation for me. I have plenty of older ladies and some gentlemen doing some snatches with not 90 degrees of, or not 180 degrees of shoulder flexion. And that's okay because they're not painful. It's not irritable to them. And we're working on getting stronger in that sense. I also saw like people would just bail on the upper body, like the upper body component, and start doing like step ups or something else. So what I think the dumbbell clean is perfect, right? Like if you're going to I've had somebody do dumbbell snatches on their one arm that was totally great. Dumbbell cleans on the other arm that wasn't so hot. So like I try the bare minimum changes that I can make for a person. So like even if that varies side to side, that means they're doing dumbbell snatches with one hand, doing dumbbell cleans with the other. That's how I roll, like as little as possible, and like changing up of exercises for me, for that person, just because I want to preserve the stimulus. That's like the first main thing that we want to do when modifying a program. So yeah. So that kind of brings me,
Awesome.
I won't even bring up more programs. I just think having a system as you go through this is really important. So Julie speaks a lot too, and you guys have not met me. I'm sorry. I've been gone for
Oh, that's right.
You guys have not met me. I'm just this
Introduce yourself, Alex. I introduced you on the first day, but we need to hear from
you've
you.
had lovely Julie for the past 2 unit meetups, but me and Julie are kind of similar, but Julie talks a lot about make it meaningful. So I want the exercise that I've chosen to be really relevant to the patient goals. It's going to be meaningful and impactful for that person. So, some of these exercises for Anna and Doris might not have been super meaningful to them or getting them to the goals fast enough. So that could have been a reason to change the exercise completely. But then I also want to preserve a stimulus. So if I really want to work on power and this person starts doing something and they're not moving fast enough for me, then I have to do something to change it so I can preserve the stimulus of power. So I think about those two things as my first line of defense when attacking programming. Then I look at the loading variables and what do I want to get out of it? Again, am I looking at power? Am I looking at muscle hypertrophy, pure strength, potentially muscle endurance? So I look at, am I in the appropriate RPE/1 rep max range? Then I dose it correctly. So then I'm using the appropriate reps and sets, and then monitoring is probably the last piece of that puzzle. Right. So I'm monitoring the patient throughout, which I think, sometimes we do a good job at, but could always do better of monitoring our programming, because I make a lot of adjustments midway. So I guess in summary, the 4 steps: make it meaningful, make it impactful, or preserve a stimulus. Oh, Dustin's going to put it in there in the chat. 2 would be to dose it load it correctly, right? So loading, looking at RPE or 1 rep max percentage, and then you want to dose it correctly, choosing the appropriate reps and sets, and then monitor appropriately. It's my keys with programming.
Yeah,
But
and I
you
think
also-
sometimes, Sorry, I think sometimes when we hear like, that we're doing power training or muscular strength, a lot of people think of like high school or college athletes. And we also have to think that this is relative to what our clients are doing. Like older adults can absolutely do power training. Does it look like my athlete who's in high school? No, but these things like doing a dumbbell snatch can be really helpful, because that power, that hip extension, that, trying to do a little bit of reactive balance to an external load, like all those things can be super helpful. And you could be using a 3-pound weight with one hand on the counter on full contact guard. So like how we're doing those types of exercises are going to be very different. And the whole idea behind this assignment is that there is this sliding scale, right? Like we take these things that we know can have a really beneficial effect on one modality of fitness, and strength and conditioning principles don't end at 65. So what's going to work from a power perspective for a younger person is going to work for an older person, but the way that we go about it is going to be different. And it's important that we know how to move that around. Yeah, that's amazing. I've had one of my guys with Parkinson's hold the parallel bar and CGA for him to jump. Amazing.
Love it.
We talk a lot about, older adults may stand to gain the most from a fitness forward approach. Usually when we say that, we're trying to be like, hey, fitness athlete crew, our older adults probably need it and are going to benefit more than your fitness athletes y'all play around with over there in CrossFit land. But when we usually say that, a lot of people will associate that with like strength training, right? Like we're talking about load, trying to get people stronger. But when you think about the preferential loss of power that will decline relatively quicker than overall strength, you may need to give even a higher priority to power training in your program than what you may perceive. It can be easy to kind of get in the mode of strength being a huge part of your program, a little bit of endurance work, balance work, right? I'll do maybe a couple power-based activities. But based on your assessment, if people are really having a difficult time producing force quickly, power training may need to be the majority of your program. You can take all of these different activities and give them a power preference, if you will, which I don't think a lot of people are really thinking about that or incorporating it. And we want you all to think very critically about applying power training to older adults. We cover this a lot in our live course, in MOA Live, at the very last lab on Sunday, which is no better way to end that weekend. It's pretty awesome lab.
A super quick way to start incorporating that is a sit to stand. Like that's typically like I have them, you can sit as slow as you want, you can take your time, you can sit there, but you're going to stand up as fast as you can. And that's a quick way to cue them and start getting them in the mindset of that power training. And then just talking about lifting in general there, I had this patient and she, her daughter was her granddaughter was a power lifter. And so I had her doing TheraBand deadlifts and she's like, oh, this is like what my granddaughter does. So she was so excited that she was doing something that she could relate to what her granddaughter was competing in. And so that built a lot of confidence in her, like, I can do this too. So you never know what you're going to find by programming this stuff in with your older adults.
Yeah. Lindsay brings up a good point here. Honestly, I had trouble seeing how a snatch is a functional movement for this population, but I do like the idea of breaking it down to one arm and a smaller range of motion. So I see where you're coming from, Lindsay. Where are you on my screen? There you are. Okay. I didn't see where you were. I see where you're coming from, but I'd have to push back a little bit. And I think for me, what has really challenged my perspective of the snatch, especially because I'm relatively new to a lot of these movements related to a barbell, for sure, not necessarily a kettlebell, but more of a barbell, is that it's much easier to think about, okay, the skill of being able to take a heavy weight from the ground up to the shoulders. Like that's pretty practical for a lot of people, right? Like as in the clean. From the ground, skipping that shoulder part all the way up overhead, there may not be that many ADLs, IADLs that we have to do where we're going to skip the shoulder and go overhead. There's a few instances where people may use it. But what the snatch can be very, very valuable for is is not necessarily the skill of being able to take something from the ground overhead, which it does a great job of that, but it shows people how to generate power and momentum from their hips to get a heavy weight vertically, wherever it stops. And if we go all the way overhead, awesome. But that will teach someone the ability to use their body in that manner better than almost any other activity. So the clean is awesome, but the snatch is kind of in that same bucket where we're getting people to be able to generate power quickly to get some type of heavy object from the ground going up, going vertically. Clean stops the shoulder, snatch goes all the way up. Both of them are going to teach that skill in a very, very potent manner. So I wouldn't completely discredit it. It can be rather potent for a lot of people and teach them the ability to produce that force very, very quickly.
And who's the going by the name Age Right? It's on, I don't, yeah, I'm seeing you and I just don't know. That's like not your actual name, I'm pretty sure. So like, I just want to make sure I'm calling you by your actual name. She mentioned that for like having power for like protective extension and like quickly reacting is like, and so that made me think that was like a really good application too, of like being more powerful with the upper extremity in general and like the body and just being able to like quickly produce force just all around is very important in this population. Oh, thank you, Trish. Sorry. It's Trish.
And
Trish has a
I
really
would
beautiful accent too.
And I would argue too that some of our isolation type exercises don't have a direct link to function, right? Like a single leg glute bridge, other than scooting in bed, like we're working on the strengthening piece of that for the carryover into functional tasks.
I think about like a bicep curl all the time. I'm just like,
yeah,
there it is. Like,
there it is.
like I get like for some people maybe like a balance exercise. I don't know, like how you I do bicep curls every day. Don't argue. I'm not arguing, but I'm just thinking like I'm just eccentrically and concentrically loading someone's bicep, and like that's the only thing I'm doing for that person. Like for some people it's a little bit more balanced, but if somebody's like really solid at them, like what am I doing? Like kind of thing. Besides just building like a bigger bicep, you know.
Which is a good goal. But
I mean, it is my goal. But like it's not, it's usually not my 80-year-old patient's goals.
Yeah. And if we think about too, like with a lot of the folks that we're working with, we can use the 1RM living example, right? So let's say we're working with Doris. Let's say Doris has a 20-pound deadlift, right? That's the most she can lift off the ground. Think of all the things in her life that she likely has to get from the ground up to a higher surface, like that are maybe 15, 16, 17, 18 pounds. And I think about those situations because for us, it's not that big of a deal, right? Like I take my cast iron Dutch oven and I take it and put it up overhead, not a big deal, right? That's a very low percentage of my 1 rep max to be able to put something overhead. But a lot of our folks, the effort to get objects up to a higher surface, whether we're stopping the shoulder with a clean or whether we're trying to go overhead with a clean and press or a snatch, that could be 90% of their 1 rep max of their deadlift, for example, if they're that relatively weak, which I think that could just add another reason why we may want to give preference to these types of movements in terms of these power-based movements, especially in that context of 1RM living.
Or how much that's limiting what they would be doing. Like how much are they avoiding doing because they know they can't or don't feel confident in their ability to do it?
Yeah.
Which just promotes more of a decline, snowball.
And I think as like clinicians, if we're feeling challenged by something or like an exercise or things like that, I think doing it is just so important. Like doing it yourself, like incorporating that into your exercise routine. Like, I don't know, like I do dumbbell snatches all the time. So like as a person, so like, and in my exercise programs, and I just see how powerful I feel and how like I can just toss 70 pounds over my head in like a one go. Like that's pretty cool and impressive. Like I think, so I see the benefit because like I'm in it and I'm doing it. And I feel confident in how to scale that or how to like talk through that with somebody, or because like I know exactly what I should be feeling. So it just always goes back to like making sure we're like doing these things that we're asking our patients to do, and feeling confident in those movements too.
Trish, that's amazing. I got a personal trainer in the last 5 years to improve my teaching, 100%.
That's
You
awesome.
I've had a
rule.
coach for years and years. That's amazing. I love that. Before we get to Lynn's question on the doc, I want to go back. Tom had a question about one of the studies that was in Hump Day Hustling. So it was a study that was looking at resistance trained males going to, with low training loads, going to fatigue and how it's a driver for hypertrophy. So what do I think about that? So this is funny because Stu Phillips is a researcher who's involved in this area of research, and he's on my committee. So every time I'm trying to make the argument on a dissertation or a committee meeting about the need for high intensity resistance training, he always brings up his own work. So I feel like I've been approached with this before. When you look at that literature, there's a couple of things. One is that it's looking at blood markers and muscle physiology markers for hypertrophy. So it's looking at essentially getting the muscles bigger. And that can be one of the goals. This is oftentimes also done in younger adults. And there isn't as much work that's done on how that translates into function. Do I think this is something that can be really useful? Absolutely. This is an AMRAP set. It's essentially the research to support doing AMRAP sets. A couple of things that I would push back on from an older adult perspective. Number one, if your need or your justification for your exercise is increasing raw strength, we know that from a physiology perspective, we get an increase in motor unit recruitment with an increase in loading. And so if we're trying to keep neuromuscular efficiency, maintain that motor unit, allow for as much collateral sprouting as possible, we are going to need to kick into those high load, low rep ranges. And that's something that I think we are missing in geriatrics in order to maintain muscle mass. Secondly, what we're starting to see is that our drivers for muscular function and muscular strengthening in older adults changes slightly, where the capacity for a muscle to hypertrophy goes down as we get older. We can see hypertrophy in a really deconditioned older adult, but a lot of the drivers of strength adaptation are neuromuscular, which means that we're looking at that nerve to muscle fiber connection. And so I think it's important that we're optimizing and using as many motor units as possible within an exercise. So we have to push into those zones. If you have a client who's high irritability, high pain, high fear, is this some literature that could potentially give us justification for using only low loads? Possibly. These sets are going into a pain cave. I don't know if anyone has done like a max set of jump squats, for example, when your quads are lactic and on fire. That's where they're going. So we have to understand like that threshold where they're at, and if it's a realistic, are we going to get that same stimulus with the older adult that's standing in front of us? Also, this literature has not been done in older adults to the best of my knowledge. I haven't looked in the last little while, but this is in resistance trained younger people. So again, we need to be looking at the data, say, how does this fit with my patient population? And based on what we know in aging physiology, our clinical knowledge, where can this fit in? And it's again, we're in this and not or, right? Like it's not something that I'm going to say we're only going to be doing this and not this. But we need to, again, be going back to kind of what Alex was saying around what is the stimulus that we're trying to drive? What are we think about evidence-informed practice. We want to have evidence-based recommendations. We want to consider our anecdotal evidence with the client population that we've been working with. And we want to really consider the person that's in front of us. So that's the trifecta. So it's a really interesting line of research, but I think it's an and not or.
And that's super helpful. I think like Tracy talked about being in home health and being limited in load. Like some of that study, the low load AMRAP sets or low load, going to failure. That's much more practical for a lot of clinicians, which is awesome to show that, that's not necessarily a waste of time per se for a lot of individuals. So we we're about done here. We want to hit on Lynn's question. Are we? Y'all want to go to that real quick? Lynn's on here. I'm just going to read it real quick. This is like the $1 million question. I feel well, this happens with a lot of cohorts. And so Lynn, you're not alone in this. So Lynn says, if I'm going, loving the evidence base for everything, unfortunately is increasing. Hold on, we're currently in a 100-day and counting extended lockdown. The facility's chosen to pull the strength and balance groups we had running. I've been spouting evidence confidently, but it is falling on deaf ears. If I'm going for a clear, concise approach to try and change minds at head office, what/how would you recommend I go about it? There's currently a seated class 3 times a week, which I tried to muscle in gently and have the participants complete in standing, but this was also vetoed. So I think many of you all may experience this, maybe not that specific example where there's like some classes going, you're trying to influence those classes, but many of you are likely in settings or situations where the rest of your team may not necessarily be on board with a lot of things that we're discussing tonight, for example, or a lot of the evidence that you're going through in terms of percentages of 1 rep maxes and relatively higher intensity. You may be the black sheep of your department or team. So what would you say to Lynn? What recommendations do you have to influence the people around her, but then also the leadership?
Lynn, was the reason for the veto for the getting them in standing was that it was too intense?
No, I think it was more that previously the classes are called Live Stronger for Longer in New Zealand. That's they are accredited by an outside agency. It's throughout the country, and it's endorsed by the Health Safety Quality Commission, Accident Compensation Corporation, and our Ministry of Health. So they're well regarded throughout the country by the big organisations. The classes we had running we were using weights, we were using cuff weights. We had them often around parallel bars or holding onto chairs, mostly standing. And then, of course, when lockdown hit, we weren't allowed access. And so I think they thought that was a way they could save some money. So because we were supervising and driving that. And so we're back in and the classes have been canned. So, yeah, it's just that when I tried to muscle in on the move and groove classes, which are all sitting to music.
That was great. That was awesome.
There was a little bit of pushback only by 1 or 2 participants in the class. It was more the pushback from head office, who had a marketing person come up with these classes, and it's around the country, and you don't mess with that. We designed these, we did them. Stay in your lane. It's none of your business, kind of thing. So yeah, even though
what
the evidence
intention?
in that consensus document about the frailty and sarcopenia research, I was like, yeah, and I was pulling it all out and going with my highlighter through the whole 25 pages. Yeah. And so I photocopied it with my highlighted parts, and I'm handing them out to everybody.
That is amazing, Lynn. For anybody, the International Conference for Frailty and Sarcopenia Research, ICFSR, just put out a new guideline. So this is for individuals with frailty and sarcopenia, and they had jump training and high intensity interval training at 85 to 95% of the peak. Like, you want to see me fired up. My last PT on ice, I was like, yes. I was just like you, Lynn. You should have seen me reading this document. I was like,
I did see you.
yeah. I was like, yeah, so that's so unfortunate that this is where the literature is going, and it's just not falling on deaf ears. Is there any rehabilitation professional story in your leadership?
No. And I only found out today the manager of that site has always been nursing-based manager, but the new manager who's been there maybe 4 or 5 months. She's actually just pure sales and marketing. I didn't realize she didn't come from a clinical background. So that's kind of my first problem, if you like. But then also it's further up the whole organisation, which is throughout New Zealand and Australia. So yeah, that's the bit that's driving me really nuts, because there are clinically based people in there.
Yeah, the really challenging part of your situation is that you're dealing with a standardized, accredited program, and their whole goal It's to make it effective, but also safe and reproducible and a consistent product. You know, they've gone for scale, and then whenever you go for scale, you lose a lot of nuance and the ability to adapt and mold something, which is difficult. They're trying to protect their product basically to that original intent, especially if it's a nationwide deal, which is difficult. But what Trish said in terms of quote the economic savings of the Sunbeam trial. So I don't know your all's you know, where the incentives lie in your particular system, but like in the context of like US in the US system, in certain models in terms of how money flows, we can get, or certain departments can get dinged or penalized if someone gets readmitted to the hospital within a certain period of time, for example, or if there's a fall in a particular type of facility. There are economic kind of repercussions on particular types of outcomes. And if you have money flowing in based on a particular outcome, and if you're able to prove that a particular intervention is going to influence that outcome, you know, regardless if they're clinical or not, if it's something that they care about, they will listen to some extent, you know. So even if they are marketing, but they are concerned about the influence of those dollars coming in, if a fall or whatever could influence that, then a stat like the Sunbeam trial can be rather potent for those individuals. But it's tough because you got to speak to what they actually care about. It's like I had a situation in home health where the avenue to really influence the team was not talking about strength training and all, you know, the stuff that we talk about here. It was more about, hey, we can actually save a lot of money as an agency and reduce the risk of rehospitalization if we do X, Y, and Z. But that's tough. I don't know your system, but that's a really difficult situation when the program is kind of accredited and standardized like that. But speaking to what they care about could potentially help.
Yeah, it's usually dollars.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's interesting that they stopped the standing one, but they kept the sitting one going.
Yeah, again, that was just because it was easy. Because, you know, they just sit them all down and put the music on, and yeah, I won't repeat my actions, but
Yeah.
That's so unfortunate, but that's the quality standard. And you're not alone at all. And it's incredibly frustrating. I've talked to a lot of clinicians too, who the rehab staff can't be involved in the group exercise. It has to go through recreation. So they're not even really involved in a lot of the exercise programs. So the influence that they have is even harder, because now you're thinking about they don't want you to be stepping on their toes, and they don't want rehab to be getting involved. And then there's like potential conflict within the team. So these are a lot of like really tough conversations. Sometimes, you know, one of the best things you can do is try and come at it from a perspective of trying to learn. So asking questions about why these decisions were made, and trying to like kind of poke holes and like talk about the research and how, you know, preventing even one fall can save the facility thousands of dollars, and all these types of things coming at it that way, or offering in services that have that economic side of things, and try and get your manager, at least the next person up, at least slightly on board, because then you can start poking holes in her argument. And if she's not from a clinical background, taking that time to really try and get her on board can help a lot, because most of the time it's because she doesn't know that there's a big difference, right? Like that's not her training. Her training is how can we make the stats, the metrics that they care about, so safety and cost metrics, as good as possible to the higher ups from a profits perspective, and to the upfront facing family who is wanting to make sure that their family member who is coming into their facility is safe. So if we say that we have all these fun programs that are safe, then again, like those are those buzzy words that unfortunately are like thinking about selling beds in a profit-driven company.
Keep us updated on that. And if you need some
download the
anonymous
one at
clinicians to like
yeah,
email them.
love that.
Yeah, we got 700 and some people in the group. We could tap into that.
And Dustin did a on ptnice.com/resources. He did a talk about 1 Rep Max Living that was guided to be given to other clinicians. So you can download his slides, download his presentation, and basically copy it and use it for your organization. So that might be a good way, like offer, hey, I'm taking this course. I would really love to share some of the things that we're learning. Can you come to this talk, or can I do this on a lunch hours?
I mean, I'm happy to talk to it from a health and safety perspective for the staff as well. If people are more mobile, they're less heavy, it's going to reduce money that way as well from staff injuries. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, good stuff, y'all. Man, it's 9:04. Shoot. It's about to be Thanksgiving for all the U.S. folks. For everyone else,
Hey, I'm in the U.S. now. I guess
That's
now
true.
the Australian
That's true.
folks.
All right, so you are done with 75% of the class. Give yourself a round of applause. You made it through a large chunk of the work. All right, so you're on the home stretch. That doesn't mean you check out. All right, so the next week, we're going to talk about psychosocial considerations. These are not the sexiest things in the world, not the most exciting. It's not fun like exercise programming and squats and deadlifts and all that stuff, but it could be some of the most significant things to screen, identify, and maybe intervene in the context of your patient. So we're going to talk about that, and then floor transfers, which is going to be a big one. That hopefully you all get a lot of ideas of how to approach getting to the floor and why it's a big deal and why you may want to do that. And then week 8 is going to be talking about how to become providers of choice, kind of a pep talk as we end. So the workload kind of goes down a little bit, so you can focus on making sure all of your assignments are in, and you take that final, you get everything in, so we're good to go, and then you can get your credit. Which we're doing pretty good still on assignment submissions. Alex, how would you? Yeah,
Pretty good.
we could be better.
Always.
Yeah, Thanksgiving's tough, when we run this through the holiday season, but there will be no grace at the end date of this course. Look on the pin post. So make sure everyone gets everything in. But we appreciate y'all being on tonight. 17 up to 19, 20 folks the night before Thanksgiving is pretty awesome. So we're pretty pumped that you all joined us and had an awesome discussion. So we will talk to y'all in 2 weeks. If y'all have any issues, questions, whatever, in the meantime, feel free to hit us up. You got to get a hold of us. But otherwise, y'all have a lovely Thanksgiving for those that are celebrating.
Happy Turkey Day.
All right. Yeah. See y'all.